I'm Neil Walder for KitGuru, and I'm back with the Corsair 1000D Mega Build. I've made a couple of minor changes since the video that we posted just before I went off to Computex. That video was just under 4 hours in length, which is just crazy mental. Seems to have gone down well, however. So I'm going to just talk you through in a kind of a quick recap of where I'm at before I get on finishing this build. So I've done the main loop, which is Core i9-X299 on an Asus Rampage 6 Extreme motherboard. We've got dual GTX 1080 Ti's in SLI, and it's now running 3D Mark Firestrike. I've still got to do the loop for the secondary system, which is the Mini ITX, which is a Supermicro Coffee Lake motherboard. Then I need to sort out storage. I've got a whole load of WD hard drives and SSDs to put in around the back, and then I need to do some cable management. Here's what I've done since the last video. I've put an SLI bridge on, which is this common or garden SLI bridge. I wanted to use this rather posh EVGA bridge. It doesn't fit with the AlphaCool blocks. The opening for the bridge is really narrow. A conventional bridge goes on, the EVGA bridge does not. I've removed the fans from the roof of the case. When I started this build, I said I put the fans in the roof, and I was even considering a radiator in the roof to fill the space. It's tall in the vertical direction, and frankly this space is just dead. The fans I had in the roof were these HD 140 RGBs. The fans in the front and at the rear are these LL120s, which are much more sophisticated RGB. The thing is, the control software that Corsair supplies, and this is very much a moving situation. So we are familiar with Link. Link's been around for a good long while. Corsair has introduced iCUE. And they were majoring on iCUE at Computex. Now, the reviewer's guide for this Obsidian 1000D case refers to Link. It tells you you need to make sure it's the latest version and so on and so forth, and it tells you how to configure it to sort out your pish-posh lighting. But if you now visit the Obsidian 1000D webpage on Corsair's website, you will see that it has a logo to do with supports iCUE. And if you want to install iCUE, which is more sophisticated update, it's a great big piece of software, it's 250 megabytes in size. You first need to make sure you've got the correct version of Link installed, and then you can install iCUE. I think I did that very soon after I got back from Computex, and when I checked again just before I did this video, basically a few hours, working hours ago, both versions of software have been updated. Nonetheless, iCUE is giving me problems, and I'm actually running this purely on Link at the moment. There we go. That's quite a hefty score, isn't it? Now, the root of my particular problem is Commander Pro, and also the sort of little add-on that's stuck on top there, lighting unit. You get one Commander Pro with the Obsidian 1000D, but you need more than one of those if you want to control multiple fans. Obviously, I've got 2 systems, many fans. So my intention was to use 3 Commander Pros, essentially 2 of them daisy-chained together for the main system, and then a third for the mini system. Where I came unstuck with that, 2 ways actually. The one is combining the HD 140 fans with the LL fans. The software basically tells you to tell it which fans you're using or which lighting strips, and then it's happy. Now, you can daisy chain together because they've got a USB port on the Commander Pro, so you can plug one Commander Pro into another, and then the one connection goes to your motherboard, and that just wasn't working for me. My feeling is that I was trying a very complicated approach with some very complicated software. I don't doubt with later revisions of the software it'll all come good. At the moment, not working. Uninstalled both Link and iCUE, reinstalled Link, and it's happy. In fact, I'll just get Link on the screen, I think. Here we have the latest version of Link, and I'm literally using it to control the RGBness in the fans that you can see. So that's 4 at the front, 2 at the rear, total of 6. And then you choose the profile you want for the fans, basically extreme, sort of conventional, or quiet. That's it. Far, far less granularity and sophistication than iCUE, but balanced against that, it works. If you glance back to the very end of the first chunk of this build, as I say, the video just before Computex, you will see that this loop is fundamentally the same. These parts are all the same. That part I've changed. I look back at what I'd done, I thought I was rushing before Computex, no doubt about it. Somebody commented in that video, quite recently actually, that my little snake of fittings under here, they think it's all a bit untidy. I can understand why people might say that. My view is that actually I quite like fittings. The way this goes actually appeals to me. If on the other hand you think it looks horrendous and mechanical, so be it. We're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. But as things are, this is where we're at. Now, to change these fittings, I had to drain down part of the loop. I took out, I'm going to say, a third of the coolant, no more than that. Basically the contents of the res plus this here, the radiator and such like remained filled, and then I refilled using the same Mayhem's pastel blue from the same bottle. You can see it in the background there possibly, and it's changed how it looks. Initially the coolant was actually quite translucent. I actually thought it looked rather good, but it was not pastel. Nonetheless, the coolant here is the same coolant, so whether it's just been mixed up somewhat in the bottle, who knows. This is the correct colour and the correct look. And it works for me as well. Again, somebody made a comment, they thought I'd made the mix wrongly. I put too much water in. It's premix. Okay, that's as it came from the bottle. But we know coolant can change over time, and in this instance, perhaps it had just settled out a tad. Anyway, that's the Mayhem's pastel blue. This is the top loop now done and finished. And it's now time for the smaller loop, which is going to be tight, no two ways about it. So I've got my GTX 1080 there with my original AlphaCool block that's going to go in this slot here, and that of course means it's then going to be in front of the CPU block. It does clear these fittings just, and all we need in this life is just. More space is good. So it goes in like so. We've got, when it drops down in the PCI Express, we've got about a centimetre clearance between that back plate and the fitting, so we're good. And the order is going to be from the out of the pump along to the in of the GPU, from the out of the GPU to the in of the CPU, from the out of the CPU has to go back to the radiator, and then from the radiator it has to go to the in of the pump. So logically that makes sense. Quite clearly that's going to be hysterically good to do. And I am struggling with certain aspects of the Obsidian 1000D case. Nothing new that I've come up with. As I said before, the vertical height of the case is just tall for no particularly good reason. You could take that much space out of it and it would be no worse for it. And that drive tower around the back, you've got 5 Caddies that go in there for 5 3.5-inch HDDs, and it's just a great big chunk of metal that's just in a lousy location. I'm not mad keen on that, and the fact you've got this pump mount plate on top of it, well yeah, but it's no use to me. This is an obstacle and I'm not enjoying that. But apart from that, we're now in the realms of put the loop together, get the mini ITX system up and running. This is the stage of the build where I kind of wish this radiator had these unions at the bottom rather than the top, just as I did initially. This radiator here, if basically it was essential the unions ended up at the top. With this one, I'm just not sure. Down at the bottom, I'll be blocked by the drive housing. If the drive housing wasn't there, as I've previously said, different story. As things stand, it's a problem. Possibly a cross-flow radiator, one union there, one union there would do the trick. I'm not actually sure whether AlphaCool does a 480 cross-flow. Anyway, whatever. This is where I'm at. This is what I'm doing. So my first job is to do the return from the CPU block to the radiator. This is an enormously long sort of convoluted piece of tubing, which is a series of pieces I've put together with a whole bunch of fittings. So I'm going to go bop, 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 and then up the back. So that is the return to there, which is obviously one of the 2 pieces that's behind the graphics card now to sight. And then I need to do the shorter piece, which is a feed from the graphics card to the CPU block. So with the first one, let's get my tub of water for lubricating O-rings and a piece of kitchen towel because we don't want drops of water. And we're going to start with some unions that I've already put together with a short piece of tubing. So an extender, a 90 a hard tube fitting, short piece of tube, and then a 90. And that simply screws in to the CPU block. and I've used the extender, so I clear the top of the RAM. Just is all we need. Then I have a horizontal tube that's going to go along here, and I've got this vertical tube going at the back. I've already got a couple of 90s in place here on top of the radiator, so I can dogleg the tubing behind the fan mount bracket, and then the tube can drop down vertically. So let's just put that in place. It's quite an unwieldy setup I've got going on here, but then it is a huge case and a good chunk of this is going to be out of sight, so that's the idea. Let's just lubricate the piece of tubing that's going to go into the O-ring there, feed this up the back whilst hanging onto that locking collar, feed it up the back, plug it in like so, put the collar on, hopefully that's a couple of turns engaged, and the collar goes on there. Make sure it's pushed in firmly as we lock it up. Make sure the CPU connection's solid. And then push this in firmly as we lock this up. And that is the return from the CPU block to the RAD. Next up is feed from GPU to CPU. For this I've basically got a 90 degree, two lengths of tubing going into a 90 degree fitting, and then a union at either end. Plug it in to the other half of the fitting, and it's just a straightforward vertical connection like so. Just shy of the lower GPU, got I don't know, 5mm or so clearance, 5 to 10mm. Which is perfectly adequate. That is locked down. Okay. Next up we have the graphics card. So I've got a 90 installed in both the in and the out. And we put the graphics card in the PCI Express slot. Flex the tube back slightly. Card goes in the PCI. Securing screws on the graphics bracket, because I really don't want to do any damage to the PCI Express slot. That would be bad. Clearly, we really don't want leaks at all. We really don't want leaks that are kind of out of sight, because that would be bad. Right. Connecting the radiator to the inlet of the pump res combo. It's not actually as straightforward as it looks. This is on a 45, and so it's got a kind of a reflex bend, and in addition the glass is here. There is not a massive amount of space, which goes back to this thing again, where I'm coming from the bottom going up, it might be easier. Perhaps it'd make no difference. I don't really want to come out, go directly down and go in, because that would look not great. So I've come up with a compromise, which is to loop around with a bunch of fittings here to go around there, put a 90 up here with the compression fitting in the end. Let's just put that in, so that goes down. We've got a straight piece of tube for the vertical, a 90 and another straight piece of tube there, and it all goes together like so. Like so. So that's a double 45 and another double 45, essentially, so we can swing around from that 45 coming out to go horizontally back. And then we'll just take off that collar, slide it on to the short tube, put that there, pop it in place, do up the collar, almost all the way. Slide that in, collar goes up. Hold it in place while we just assemble the fitting. And then nip it all up tight. Make sure everything's tight. And that is not perfect, but considering the lack of space here and the fact I can't really crank it out a tad and drop down more plumb, that is going to do the trick. The final piece of the puzzle is to connect the out from the pump res unit to the in of the GPU. So I've got a little model here, a piece of aluminium welding rod just bent up, which will go like so. And that is the object of the exercise. Quite simple in that plane, bends up. Quite simple in that plane, bends back. Not entirely simple in that plane because this is not completely bang on perpendicular. But that's the object of the exercise, which is 3 bends. And each bend that you add means your failure rate goes up. The snag with this PETG tubing from AlphaCool is that you have to put the heat quite close to it to get it up to temperature. It seems to take quite a while to heat up, and as it gets hotter and hotter, you have to move the heat away once you get to a certain point. Get it too close and it will blister like that really quickly. This particular batch of tubing seems to be the thing. The tubing seems quite variable, which is why I've gone for straight runs where I possibly can, because it makes life so much easier. Certain bends are fine, other bends not fine, and it seems to vary from tube to tube. Literally, you get 4 tubes in the box and each tube can be different to the previous. So that is a complete failure. That is more of a success, and that is going to go like so. One of the considerations with this tube, apart from wanting it to be horizontal because that's neater and keeping it parallel to the tube that's behind it, is the power connector for the graphics card is just behind. So if it goes bang straight, you're fine. If you start getting a bit clever and kind of jinking in, then the power's in the way. So we've got power cables here and here, which is why going straight at the front was the obvious choice. I'm trying to convince myself I like this, and the fact is I don't. I'm going to have to crank this out somewhat to get that tube vertical, because that just isn't, it's not right. So let's take off this and see what we can do. This is not going to be a 100% win. This is not a win-win situation. I'm not happy with how that was. Let's see if this looks any better. I mean, even in principle. Put that back there. And if we do that and we put a 90 down the... I think that's worth a try. Right, that's 24 centimeters from outside to outside. Add 5mm insert into each fitting. So that's 10 centimeters, so 25 centimeters overall. Take your piece of tube, mark it, cut it. Deburr it as necessary. And then clean it up. Wash the tube through to clean out any dust bits and pieces. You don't want those pumping around your loop after all. Put on the collars. I mean, it's a straight piece of tube, so it doesn't matter which way around they go. This is going to the 90 down the bottom. And this is the compression fitting at the top. Okay, so on the one hand, we've now got double 45s at both ends, which means the tube actually moves. You can move it in a variety of positions. On the other hand, you can get the thing vertical. It's cranked out now and runs parallel to the res, and it looks correct. I've not really said much about the colours going in the two loops. My thinking is really straightforward. I've got a bunch of WD hard drives and SSDs, including blue and green models. So I'm thinking blue and green coolant. Now I have to confess, the blue of the WD blue is rather darker than the Mayhem's pastel blue, but such is life. In actual fact, the colour there is actually very similar to the bottle label, but not the same as the actual coolant itself. I might tinker around putting a few drops of one of the other coolants in there to see if I can darken it up, but I'm not really stressed. The second colour is WD green, and Mayhem's UV green is in the correct ballpark. But again, it's not a big deal, it's just to have two colours. I mean, red and black are the traditional, but that does get a bit samey. Also black and white, they're quite good. But anyway, blue and green's where we're at. Okay, let's open the reservoir. Grab some kitchen towel. Some more kitchen towel. And put coolant in. That is quite green. Okay, and then we top up the bottle. Ready for the next stage. Okay, and let's just put the top on the res just in case we get a bit of funny business going on. Don't need a fountain of green, that's for sure. Just loose, cross thread. Right, fingers crossed. And the ITX button is on the back, and I'm going to be ready to turn off the power just in case. Through the graphics card. Nice, we had some sort of graphic signal. Oh, I see. Huh. It's not actually connected. Graphics card is not quite in correctly. Let's turn that off. DisplayPort connector is not quite plugged in because the graphics card is very slightly out of line. I have to pull the graphics card forward just a fraction of a millimetre, just enough to let the DisplayPort connector go in properly. DisplayPort, vertical graphics, fraught, that's all I'm saying, fraught. Okay, let's turn that back on. And that. And let's see what happens this time. Ah, blue light. Right, that's positive. Super micro bias. Excellent. Okay, that's looking good. Right, we haven't yet got coolant pumping around. It's static, so let's see what we can do with pump speed. How do I switch from easy mode to advanced mode? Guess I'll do it there. Okay. Thermal and fan. That looks good. Always good learning a new BIOS setup. And when did I last look in a super micro BIOS? Fan control. What have we got? PWM. Which? I think my pump is connected to the CPU fags. Okay, so I click on fan control. That gives me these options. If I go for full speed, what happens? My green is slowly rising at the back. Something's happening here. Do I actually have a powerful option? All right, it's slowly but surely going up in pulses, air's coming out, so it is slowly sorting itself out. What's CPU temp doing in the meanwhile? CPU temperature. Right, well that's 1250, which as a pump speed is very little. You can see levels gradually rising, occasionally getting bubbles coming through, so that's going to sort itself out. CPU temp's 56, so that's not terrible. Let's just top up the res, but before I do, I'm going to have a quick squint to make sure there's nothing awful going on in terms of leaks. And getting a bit of a head of pressure on the coolant might help as well. Okay. Bubbles, that's a good thing. I'm on the verge of tipping the system around just to get things moving, but it's a big, heavy case. Really big, really heavy case. And I really don't want the whole blooming thing tipping over. Obviously what we want here is for the coolant to flow around and to start coming out. Right, I'm gonna have a wiggle around. I'm gonna see if I can get some air out of the system. As with so much in this life, give it a few minutes, bit of time, suddenly a few bubbles come popping around, and here we go. The pump is now whirring away at full speed. Where's that option gone? Oh, we want to go back to advanced mode, thermal fan. Fan control, full speed, stable, and there's super micro, F4. Hang on, let's move that bottle in case you can't see it. I think you can, but F4, save and exit. And then when it restarts, hopefully the pump will be running at a sensible speed. It's calling it a fan, but obviously it's the pump is connected to the CPU fan header. It's Mini ITX has only got a couple of fan headers, system fan, CPU fan, so it doesn't have a dedicated pump connector. And let's see what happens this time. And then when the pump slows down, we should get rid of a whole load of these micro bubbles. And this time we should just go straight into Windows. Okay, well that's looking more promising. So we have a second PC. Fingers crossed, and I mean that literally, figuratively, in every sense. We don't have any leaks at the moment. Next thing to do is to set up Corsair Link on this second system. Link is already installed, however, this is an older version. I've already updated the version that's on the main system, because obviously they're two separate systems, two separate drives. They're physically in the same case, but that doesn't matter. They are two separate PCs. Jeepers, this is a big PC. Okay, we've made progress. Both systems up and running, both cooling systems working correctly as far as I can see. With the Supermicro Mini ITX, I had to bump up the PWM fan speed to control the pump. So it's running at 70%, a tad higher than I would like, but it's not a high power pump control, it's a fan control. And so I've had to kind of trick it a little bit. Lighting's looking good. Let's just turn off a bit of lighting here. And so the front, as before, the main system has got 4 of the front fans plus the 2 rear. The mini system's got 4 front fans. I've got them all on the sort of rainbow marquee, which is the default you see endlessly. Looks rather good to my eyes. But I am not finished. For one thing, I can add some internal lighting strips to take up some of the vast cavernous space inside the case. And for another thing, I've got some cable management to do around the back, and I need to get some storage in this just to kind of finish the build off. At the moment, the back is not looking pretty. I have a handful of tasks to accomplish here. So first I have to accommodate all the hardware that's required. We've got 2 Commander Pros, which I've stuck on the back panel using the self-adhesive pads that come with the Commander Pro, so looks a tad crude, but works well enough. We've got the one Commander Pro for the X299 main system. That is the lighting breakout unit with connections for the 6 RGB fans that are connected to this. There's the second Commander Pro for the SFX system, and the lighting breakout unit for that is down the front of the case, so the cable trails up there. I need to clear this space here to accommodate these WD Blue hard drives, 6 of those, total of 30 terabytes. And I've also got these SSDs to put in place. Obviously I don't need the SSDs, it's for the look of it, but it's also to demonstrate what you can or cannot do with this case. And the SSDs go on these panels here. You'll note there are actually spaces for 3 SSDs here and 3 on the corresponding side, so that's a total of 6 2.5-inch drives should you wish. I'm using 4. In addition to that, I've got the 2 M.2 drives. So we have a huge array of WD storage. I need to clear this space here. I need to tidy up the cabling to a certain... I mean, obviously it looks like a disaster at the moment, but these doors are going to be covering this side of things. So provided the cabling is behind the doors and doesn't look too awful, it will be job done. Obviously we want to make it look reasonably tidy. And common sense says, if you're doing a proper custom build, so with your 2 power supplies and then cable extensions, so when the cables feed through they're all nicely trained and combed and such like, clearly all the power supply cabling would be in the back here, and then the extensions would go through, which means you'd have more gubbins to accommodate. It's worth bearing that in mind. Right, I'm going to get these drives out of the way, put the French doors in place and start tidying some cables. And I'm not expecting a whole lot of chit chat here because there's not a lot to say. There'll just be some snicking of cable ties and hopefully not too much tutting and humming and grunting from me. Incidentally, for jobs like this, you need big packs of cable ties. The fact you may... Actually, you know, I've not even looked in the accessory box to see what's included in the way of... Now, in fairness to Corsair, they've included a very few cable ties. I mean, looks like half a dozen perhaps. All sorts of extension cables and such like. We've got temp sensors, because the Commander Pro has connection points for temp sensors. I think it's 4 per Commander Pro, and you get 1 Commander Pro with the case, so 4 temp sensors, which for any system is very good going, and various bits and pieces, plus fasteners. Oh no, in fairness, right, okay, so the drive caddies for the hard drives are tool-free, so I don't need fasteners for that. I am going to need fasteners to install the SSDs on these little caddies. So I'll need a few of the screws in the accessory pack. and I've got lots of those. But Corsair does include these Velcro ties with a little Corsair logo on. Looks like 10, 12? So yeah, fair play Corsair, good work. Nonetheless, cable tie time. Boo, boo. Boo, 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 boo. We're doing quite well for cable tie points around the back panel. Some of them are in curious locations I can't really use, but one place it'd be really handy to have some points would be here. Power supply cables come out of here for the main system. The SFX cables are here. They're going to have to go places. That grommet there is the main channel. And now we do have one tie down point there, but I'd like to see one or two there. A minor point, but it's the sort of thing that just... Common sense says I don't want any connection to be broken. When I'm unplugging and replugging, I'm concerned about everything, but there's obviously a level of priority. So lighting, that would be annoying. CPU power, that would be really annoying. Pumps, that would be terrible. The two connections I am most interested in double checking at all stages are those, because they control the two pumps. If those go wrong, that doesn't get pretty. While I'm griping a row of about half a dozen cable tie anchors across there, that would please me as well. Basically, cable tie anchors just everywhere. Incidentally, if you're doing the kind of like in a movie, the body count or the how much ammo used thing, how many cable ties have I used? I've got no idea, I'm not keeping count. It's just a lot. It's way more than I strictly need, and I've removed some and replaced them and such like. The object of the exercise is just to get everything condensed together, because let's just get that tucked away a little bit. Those two connections are intended for the SSDs that are going to go there. If I put that there, and those are for the hard drives and also for these SSDs. All being well, a little bit of resistance here, which goes back to my thing of shame there's no anchor points there, because if I could pull that in just easy peasy, that'd really help. Right, let's see about getting some storage installed. 5 hard drives going in, 5 caddies going in there. There's no sort of little tear lines. Okay. Do these go, oh, these must go in this way because it's a solid plate that end. Which way round do they go, this way or that way? Seems okay. Let's just keep on with this and see if all 5 go in. Scissors. Ref these caddies for these 3.5, 2.5, so you've got drive pins at the sides which engage in these threads here. You do sometimes find hard drives can have some slightly peculiar arrangements. I think it was a Seagate, some persuasion, where you have the ends and then these holes can be slightly out of whack. So if you're mounting on these, if you're screwing in from the base, not a problem. But if you're going from the sides, it can be an issue. That is an entirely conventional setup. So you simply engage with the pins there, flex it around like so, and then when that slides in, that is just solid, and also it's kind of suspended on the, well, it's not rubber mounted, it's plastic mounted, but the same thing. For a drive that has the correct holes, that is just absolutely solid and terrific. If you want to put an SSD on there, it will go in like thus, and then you screw from the bottom, and that's again absolutely fine. So for let's pick a percentage, totally random percentage, 90% of applications, that type of caddy works really well. If you got the wrong drives for it, it's a nightmare. In this instance, perfect. Somebody made a suggestion in a posting I read a while ago that the silica gel that we get in endless bits of packaging, if you keep it somewhere in those sealed little packets and then put it in like a freezer bag or some such, they reckon it comes in handy if you have the, oh no, my mobile phone's got wet. You know, this thing about putting a phone in rice or some such to draw out moisture. Good luck with that. Silica gel, on the other hand, is, you know, used for that exact job. Never tried it. Seems like a reasonable idea, but perhaps it's one of those things where someone came up with a theoretical neat idea. Now then, this is where I've gone wrong at this stage. I do need to be going that way, which is why I've got a gap at this end. That's the fella. And if I take, okay, those two power connections are very similar lengths. This one's got slightly less free play, so let's hook this up and see. Oh look, and it's even oriented correctly, so we can just daisy chain these together nicely. That's quite satisfying. And then this is intended to go to those two SSDs there. So if we put that like so, and then we've got cables thus, so that's all good. That goes under there. Happy? It's time for the SSDs. I've got four 2.5-inch WD SSDs here, two blue, two green. They're each nominally 500 gig in capacity, two 480s, two 500s. Here are those SSDs. Each of these sort of cable covering French door kind of affairs has got three little drive caddies. I can't remember, frankly, whether I've swapped these doors over at some point or other because they've been on and off a few times. But you've got three caddies on each side. I'm going to use two just for the symmetry of the thing. And the positions of the caddies I'm going to have to use. I noted actually when I was closing this door as a trial thing that if the SSD was mounted there, it would actually hit the SFX power supply. So common sense says that that caddy should be up top. And if I can just, that's it. And then I want the caddies on the other side to be matching, kind of, because we're out of kilter, but basically not in the bottom position. And that goes there. And then we have a little think about where we want the SSDs to go. I've got four SATA cables feeding through from the mini ITX secondary system because all the hard drives are on the main X299 system, the ATX. These four cables are coming through from the mini ITX, and I'm going to put two SSDs on each side. And I'm thinking on this side, I'll go for these positions here. And if I do that to make it look right, I'll go for these two here. I think that makes sense. I might as well leave these dead caddies in position. And let us see. So do we go for greens and blues, or do we go for green, blue? I mean, it doesn't make any difference, you understand. This is purely a question of just how it might look. Let's go for a blue and a green on each side. Let's go for... I honestly don't have any... I do have a problem. Yeah, there's a problem. Okay, so the SATA connections, power and SATA cables, that's obviously the way it goes. And they go directly into that thumb screw there. And there is no way on God's green... Oh, great, a problem. Okay, let's start on the easy side because now I'm just mildly annoyed. And let's go for blue at the top. So if we put the blue here, take a couple of the screws that come with the huge bag of accessories from Corsair. Only going to use two screws on each SSD because you don't need to use four. Let's just screw those into the caddy. Okay, so that is an SSD the correct way up. Hook it in, put the... Tell you what, even though it kind of hooks in on those two little tangs there, and then the thumb screw goes in, there's actually quite a lot of sort of movement, as in those two lugs don't kind of just hook in place and then you're good. You have to kind of get it right. Oh well, and that green goes below. Okay, and then on the other side, that is on. So we want the blue to go in the top, and we also want to be able to connect the cables to it, which means I've got to flip the thing. That's terrible. Yeah, I could attempt to peel off that vinyl label. That's not going to, I mean, it's going to look awful. Because when you peel vinyl, as you know, it always stretches, always. So that's just rotten. It's going to upset some people, this is. I mean, I'm quite a grumpy person by nature, but compared to certain of the KitGuru viewers and readers, I'm really easygoing. Some of you get quite upset about it. Look at that. Oh, God. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. And I think, yes, and an apology to Western Digital. You loaned us these drives and I've done this to you. Dear, oh dear. Actually, in all seriousness, and without, you know, kind of going on about OCD and such like, we do get this on occasion with SSDs and drive sleds and such like, where you want to be able to have the option of reversing the drive because the cables don't line up or it looks cosmetically incorrect. If an SSD manufacturer is to actually come up with either a reversible label or, frankly, if they supplied a spare label in the package, and I can understand why they might want to resist that because it might end up on a different product, but something. This is definitely, I mean, looked horrible, but this is not the first time we've come across this. And I had this, I can't remember what the case was. I used 3 SSDs in it, and I literally picked 3 off the shelf at random, 3 different makes, and the connection points were, it was like a toss of a coin whether it would look right or look wrong. Okay, we've got, right, so that's the 4 SSDs connected. Let's take these 2 SATA cables. And this is always going to be a problem with this, that as the door hinges in, the cables are kind of being sort of folded around, but it was always inevitable it was going to happen. The joy of moving parts. And let's do that, and let's do that. Not liking that very much. And let's take this up behind here. And this up behind here. Just move around so you can see a bit. And then we want to hook up the power. Connecting power is a snag. And the reason it's a snag is because my main 1600 watt power supply has got oodles of connectors, and my tiddly little SF600 SFX power supply has got very few. There is actually one spare connector because the GTX 1080 only has one PCI Express power plug on it. So I don't need the second PCI Express graphics connector, and that's the only cable that's left in the box. The others are all already hooked up. We have a few bits and pieces over. For example, here we have some Molex. So if I had some of those Molex to SATA adapters, for example, I could string those up and I could hook those in. It would look a little bit, but it would work. But instead, I'm going to take another slightly unsatisfactory approach, but it will work, which is to use these SATA connectors from the main power supply and hook those up to these SSDs. And that means that in order for the SSDs to work, the main system will need to be on, and then so turn on main system, turn on secondary system, and obviously as the data connections are connected up to the correct motherboard, that means it will work. Let's just hook that in there. Goodness me, this is close. Actually, let's hook up the right angle connection first and then stretch that across so it just goes in close, 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 but it does go. Okay, double check the data cables are in. Close the door, which means we've now got far more free play than we had before. Good. And then over this side, similar story. So this is coming from the hard drives. I had a conversation with a power supply company in the past, and they were asking me, did I think that there we go, that's much neater, and then close that up. And they asked me, do I think that the cables for SATA, should they be straight or 90 degree? This, that, or the other, how long should the spacing be between the connectors? And I said, why not include some spare cables in the with the power supply? You know, a couple of extras. I said, do you know how much they cost? I said, no. They said, about $1 a piece. We're not doing that. I thought, fair enough. So there we have it. That's the SSDs connected, and here goes with the glass panel. Top goes on first. Yeah, top goes on just before the bottom. Close that up. Et voila! There's an awful lot of hardware hiding behind that door now. Here we have the finished PC up and running. Both PCs are turned on. You can see that by the fact that all the fans are illuminated, so it is both systems up and running. This monitor is connected to the 18-core Core i9 X299 system with the dual GTX 1080 Ti's. Oh, just for a laugh, let's run Cinebench. It won't take very long, and I'm going to keep an eye on the CPU temperatures while it's going, and they're around the 50 degrees mark. The 18-core Core i9 is a natural candidate for delidding. It gets hot. It's running here at 52 odd degrees. If you overclock it, the temperature will push up to 90 or 100. We're running now on the Mini ITX system, so this is the Coffee Lake Core i7-8700K, stock clock, 6 cores, all churning away. Which is a good, good reliable system, and temperatures there 68 degrees, absolutely classic Intel. The packaging is just terrible. You can slap on a great big cooling system and the temperatures are still higher than you would like. There we go, 1392. You can run these scores all day long. And now it's the turn of Firestrike. Going to do that in a window so we can keep an eye on GPU temperatures. So this is GTX 1080 with the original Alpha Cool block on it. And now we're running Firestrike. I'm doing a custom run in a window just so we can have a little look at GPU temperatures just for a laugh. Might as well get a learning experience out of this. So we've got the Coffee Lake i7-8700K stock clocks, GTX 1080, and that's the original Alpha Cool block there rather than the new versions which are on the 1080 Ti's on the other system. And leaning in, so GPU temperature is gone now, 52 degrees. It was 42 when it was idling, up to 52 and back again. And that's going to be the mark of it. And it's going to churn away here, happy as Larry. Absolutely glorious seeing a liquid cooled system in operation because graphics really benefit from decent liquid cooling. Intel processors, tragically, they need assistance, they need delidding. It's terrible to report. AMD soldered heat spreaders, on the other hand, a delight. And quite clearly it's now going to pound away through 3D Mark Firestrike without any drama whatsoever. But even though it's a mini ITX system, it's a proper system. And of course with all the Larry RGB and such like and the coolant and so on and so forth, it looks the part as well. Rewind 5 or 6 hours of video, because I'm not quite sure how long this is going to end up being in the final analysis, but the first chunk was 4 hours, this second chunk is in the territory of 2 hours, and about 6 weeks or so from when I started the build. And what we actually have here is a review of the Corsair Obsidian 1000D case. Corsair treated the launch of the 1000D in quite a clever way. So we saw it at it was Computex a year back, wasn't it, the Project Slate thing, and then they sent out at least one sample as a kind of teaser video to a YouTube channel, and then they sent out samples to the various reviewers in April of 2018. But they sort of put a condition on the review, which was, forget just doing a straight review, it's got to be a mega review, it's got to be really over the top. Well, here you go. This is the sort of result you see. In fairness to Corsair, they sweetened that particular pill because a mega build takes more time. That's, you know, more of an investment. It means you do fewer reviews in the month. They said basically, send us a list, we'll send you a bunch of hardware. And as you can see, I've got a whole load of RGB fans from them, and also some memory. However, I got hardware from a load of KitGuru partners, in particular from AlphaCool, but also Zeus, and now Supermicro, and so on and so forth. So it's a showcase in the most literal sense for a number of companies' hardware. And the result is undeniably impressive. But if you take away the glitz and the glamour, you can say, blimey, it's a lot of work, and you will absolutely certainly pick holes in the job I've done, because there's no way that you would build two PCs into this case the way I have. And in fact, nobody would build the same system twice, systems plural, twice. That's the nature of this. It's very much a unique product, albeit it has certain similarities, does the 1000D to the Phanteks Elite, and probably if you go back a bit in time to various other really large cases from a couple of manufacturers. But nonetheless, you put two motherboards in it, and then after that, the sky's the limit. I've gone down the routes I've gone down, there are certain decisions I've taken that I kind of wish I hadn't taken, and there are other options I would have liked to have pursued. If you take the radiator racks, the 4x120s at the front times 2, so the two 480 radiators with the 8 120 fans, to my mind that works. It's a visual thing, in the same way as Cooler Master has recently done the dual 200mm fans. Now, when I first got this case and I got the reviewer's guide, Corsair was talking about accessories that would be coming. And if you now go to Corsair's website, you will see they have those accessories available. So you could have alternative radiator racks. But nonetheless, I've got the 8x120 for the front, and I've got the 3x140 in the roof. The 3x140 doesn't work so well for me. Had I got the correct Corsair 140 fans to go in the roof, it would have made more sense. But nonetheless, not that would be just lighting, nothing else. I mean, sure, you'd have the fans in the roof, but it would be a really minor tweak. If, on the other hand, you changed the top rack to a 3x120 or a 4x120 and put a radiator in the roof, that would do something. For the front, I'd be interested in the idea of either a single 480 rad or dual 360 rads. I think that'd be my favourite idea, because that way, instead of having the radiators full height, you could have it a bit of space top, bit of space bottom, make the connections easier. I think the least interesting option is the 2x200mm fan option that Corsair is offering, which I can't help but think, you know, Cooler Master H500, because to the best of my knowledge, Corsair doesn't do 200mm fans, and you want to stick with the whole Corsair RGB fans Commander Pro thing. So offering the 200mm option, I'm all in favour of that. But what I would like to see with the Corsair Obsidian 1000D in the box, in addition to the two racks that you get, are a couple of other options. So for example, in addition to the 3x140, a 4x120, which could go either top or front, and maybe, as I say, a 6x120, and that would give you loads of options for how many radiators you're going to install and where. In terms of problems with this case, not really actually any problems, except it's so blooming big you've got to do something with all the space. Not mad keen on the storage layout, but I've been over that a few times. So the fixed drive cage for the 5 hard drives, and then the way those two doors go on to cover the cables, and then you put SSDs in that, not great. Those are probably my single biggest bugbears. Beyond that, it would be nice, as this case is clearly intended to work with Commander Pro, you get one with it after all, and you're logically going to add a second, maybe a third. It would be good if the case actually accommodated them in some way, if you actually had fixed mounts or mounting areas. Something purposeful. And you go, this is where your Commander Pro goes, or here, or here, or here, and actually mounts on the Commander Pro using the sort of double-sided sticky pads. It works, but it's not really right. So there's that, and also then the fact you have to train the cables through from, in particular from the fans at the front, they have to get through. It's details. So there's a couple of big-ish items, as I say, storage, and a couple of smaller items, particularly the Commander Pro mounts. But you will appreciate that this is detail. Here's the thing. If you head off and look for reviews of the Obsidian 1000D, both on YouTube and on the web in general, my guess is you will not find very many. I have looked about a week ago now. But obviously, as this video will be live for years to come, the timing of my statement is important. Nonetheless, I received this case in April, middle of April. I worked on it, I sorted out a lot of parts to get them on the way and such like, and then I worked on the build in May, and we put up the first 3 hours 56 video, which got me to a significant way through the build just before Computex. When I went off to Computex, a few people had posted videos saying that they had builds in progress or had plans. When I got back from Computex, I checked on progress with a few people. Very little progress. I don't doubt there will be builds going up. I can think of at least 3 people who are at a certain state in their builds. And at least one of those people, basically, they're going to be gutting the case and putting in all sorts of distribution panels and such like. So basically, they'll have a shell and they're going to just take out the innards and rebuild it, which is okay if that's the route you want to go down. But it seems a shame to take a £450 case and then essentially rip it apart and start over. If you're doing that, why not really go for the high end and buy a £700, £800 case labs case, which is sort of modular by its very nature. Nonetheless, let's stick to the point. My point about these other reviewers is not in any way to pick holes in their work. It's to say this is a blooming complicated build. Now, there's various aspects of it that I know you won't like. For example, I haven't used any aftermarket cables. Clearly, had I done that, it would look prettier. That's just an obvious fact. On the other hand, you can see that if I disconnected the cables from the graphics card and from the motherboard, pulled them back, put on extensions and made it all look pretty, that's basically a little bit of time, relatively speaking, compared to everything else, and some money, and quite doable, and more cables to hide away. So in a sense, a detail, but you look at this and you go, well, that needs fixing, doesn't it? And it's like, yeah, okay. So there's that. Overall, the build itself is a success, provided you want 2 Larry systems in a ginormo case. Now, I know most people don't want that. The whole ethos of the dual system essentially is you're building a wacko PC and you want a secondary system, so when you're streaming or something, it can handle the load. Well, you're kind of making the case. We've been over this argument a few times with previous cases that can handle dual system builds, and we'll be doing it no doubt when that Fantex Evolve X comes out, because that can also handle dual systems. Why do you want dual systems? Most people don't. That's the end of it. If you get a case like this, you require dual systems, otherwise it just looks stupid. And there you go. So you go down the way you go down, you make it look as pretty as you can, you bung in the hardware, you end up with wahey. Now, it's a huge system, it's very hard to move around, you have to constantly take care you're not knocking parts and such like, but once you've built a system like this, wow, it's a feature, no two ways about it. You're not going to put it beside your television, are you? It's going to take up the entire front room, but you require essentially your gaming room, and then it's going to be this monolith of glass and lighting, and to my mind, it looks pretty darn impressive. Anybody that sees it doesn't go, what the heck's all that about then? Well, they've lost interest in life, to my mind. So it ticks a few boxes, no two ways about it. It's expensive, the result is impressive. Nonetheless, there's room for improvement, and once you're spending 10 grand on a PC, why not 15 or 20? Where do you draw the line? It's a colossal sum of money for 2 computers. No argument. And yet, where do you draw the line? As a case, it's all right. I have suffered at certain points during the build, and as I say, the fact that there are various other review sites and review channels who have not yet completed their 1000D builds, well, I think that tells a tale. A lot of work involved. I think Corsair's handled the launch of the 1000D in quite a cutesy way by offering the builders a load of their hardware. Corsair is one of the very few companies capable of doing that because they have such an enormous portfolio of products. And let's face it, the RGB certainly works. I will be interested when IQ is fixed, updated, as it evolves, to see how that handles systems like this, where you've got like an ecosystem of RGB. Because as I say, I've gone back to Link because that just worked. IQ is giving me problems. So there's a thing. But it's only by trying these things you actually find out how well they work in the real world. Nonetheless, we've got there. This is the Obsidian 1000D, aka a Project Slate, and we've got RGB, we've got glass, we've got dual systems. It works, it's here, it's done, done, done. And I must confess, I'm really glad it's finished. It's taken an awfully long time. If you like this video, thumbs up. If you don't, thumbs down. If you want more from KitGuru, click to subscribe. Hit the bell button, will alert you to new videos as they become available. I'm Leo Walder for KitGuru. This is the Corsair Obsidian 1000D with one heck of a lot of other hardware.